Today we are going to finish talking about the Ten Commandments. We skipped ahead last weekend and covered the 9th and the 10th commandments, and today we're going to go back to the 8th commandment, thou shalt not bear false witness. And this commandment has to do with the truth. The Old Testament reveals to us that God is the God of truth. He is the source of all truth. His word is truth. His law is truth. And since God is true, the members of his people are called to live the truth. If we fast forward to the New Testament, then, in Jesus Christ, we have God's truth made visible. Jesus tells us that the truth will set us free, and so, like his disciples, follow Jesus is to live in the spirit of truth. And Jesus speaks to us directly about the truth in today's gospel, where he says, "Fear no one. Nothing is concealed that will not be revealed, nor secret that will not be known. What I say to you in the darkness, speak in the light. What you hear whispered, proclaim on the housetops. Do not be afraid of those who kill the body but cannot kill the soul." So he's telling us to live in the truth, and not only live it, but bring the truth to the light, to reveal what is hidden in darkness. That's not to say, go around blabbing your mouth and, spilling your guts to everybody and being the biggest gospel possible. But he wants the truth to be known. And we're drawn naturally to the truth. We recognize truth as a virtue from a very young age. We recognize that, we should be wary of and mistrustful of people who are two-faced and deceitful and hypocritical. Those people are at best unpleasant to be around, and at worst malicious. And then on top of all that, society just simply wouldn't function if we didn't have a basic understanding of being truthful to one another. If you wanted to, I suppose you could boil all of the world's problems, probably has always been the problem, you could boil it down to a lack of truthfulness, to a rise in deceitfulness, to a lack in authenticity. Social media has trained us all to be fake because we only show people what we want people to see. So when it comes to the 8th commandment, what are the things that go against it? What are we looking for when we're evaluating our own actions? First, there's the literal meaning of the commandment, which we actually probably never crosses our minds when we think about the 8th commandment. That is bearing false witness. This is a reference to like being in a courtroom and being a false witness. And this is what we would call, in modern times, we would call it perjury. But that's probably the least common way of breaking the 8th commandment, at least for most people. Judging others rashly is another offense against the 8th commandment. And the Catechism tells us that the best way to avoid judging others rashly is to begin by assuming the best from everyone. Have I allowed someone or something to affect my opinion of someone before I even get to know them myself? I've been warned for years that my 7th grade class next year is the class, and to be wary of them. And I guess that has allowed me my perception of them to be impacted negatively, when in fact usually the class that they warn me about is that they end up being one of my favorite classes. So we'll see what happens, but in a few weeks. But it could even be the person themselves that gives you the wrong impression. Some people are prickly and unpleasant to be around. Just because someone makes it difficult to love them doesn't mean that they're not worthy of love, or should be excluded from being loved. In the words of Jesus, if you love only those who love you, in return, what good is that? Even tax collectors and sinners do the same. So ask yourselves, have I gotten to know this person before I'm drawing a conclusion about them? If we live life not assuming the worst in people and challenging ourselves to really get to know people, even people that we disagree with fundamentally, even on the basis of lifestyle, life becomes a lot less frustrating, and in fact, it becomes far more fulfilling. The next sin against the 8th commandment is detraction, where we aim to destroy the reputation of someone else. And this is usually referred to as slander. You can even attack someone with words that are true. Telling the truth can be a sin against the 8th commandment. If your aim is to make that person look bad or to make yourself look good in comparison, the Catechism says that even words of flattery can be against the 8th commandment. If the goal of that flattery is nefarious, you say nice things to manipulate that person or to get them onto your side. Which brings us to another sin that may or may not involve telling the truth, and that is the classic and never-ending small-town sin of gossip. You know, we all know each other in small towns, and half the time we're related to each other in small towns. And because of that, we're so close, we often look after our neighbors and we care for them. My heart turns to the Calvert family this week, and we all want to know how they're doing and what we can do to help. But sometimes when we talk about other people, we're doing so not to help them or to make sure that they're doing well. When we gossip, we talk about other people to impress others about our knowledge, about the juicy details. We talk about people because we've heard rumors and we want to know if those rumors are true. We have an unhealthy desire for those personal kind of details. So how do we draw the line between talking about the news and having a genuine desire to help someone and crossing the line into gossip, which can be sinful? Simply put, you can ask yourself 4 things when it comes to gossip. Number 1, why am I talking about this person? Is it for a good reason? A helpful reason? Number 2, does the person I'm telling this to really need to know? Do they have a right to know? Or is it a private thing? Number 3, would the person that I'm talking about be fine with me saying this about them? And number 4, is what I'm talking about something that was told to me in confidence? Is it something that I should keep private? It doesn't even have to be a verbal agreement about that. You don't have to have a handshake deal about it. There's topics that we can simply assume that are told to us in confidence. So ask yourselves, have I betrayed someone's confidence in talking about this? That's part of the 8th commandment. Now, what we haven't talked about yet is what most people think of when they think of the 8th commandment, and that is lying, which is, it's not actually in the direct, at first glance, the 8th commandment, at least from the perspective of the Old Testament, is about bearing false witness in a trial. But lying is probably the most common way that we break the 8th commandment. Lying is, the intention to deceive someone. And that's the key phrase. It's not just lying to deceive someone, it's lying in order to deceive someone who has the right to know the truth, which is key. There's the famous scenario that, if you were hiding refugee Jews from the Nazis and the SS comes knocking at your door and asking if there's any Jews inside, what do you do? What do you say? Well, sir, I can't tell a lie. Here they are right here through this door. You'll find them there. That doesn't sound very noble. It doesn't sound right, even though the alternative might be lying. But is it lying? In March of 1942, Pope Pius XII reported to President Roosevelt that there was something happening to the Jewish population in Europe. And the American president dismissed it as not enough evidence to pursue investigating it. And so Pope Pius XII took it upon himself to make sure that over 15,000 Jews were smuggled into monasteries and convents and even into the Vatican to be protected, even though the Vatican was occupied by the Nazis. Do you think that Pope Pius XII was open and honest with the Nazis about any of that? Of course he wasn't. Now, on the other hand, does that mean that Pope Pius XII was guilty of lying? The answer is no. The reason why it sounds like lying to Nazis is a good thing is because it is a good thing. Here's the reason. You only owe the truth to legitimate authorities. If someone asks you to participate in a sin, they immediately lose authority, no matter if it's your best friend or a parent or the government. You are never obligated to sin or even participate in a sin or be accomplice to a sin. There's other legitimate reasons for withholding the truth. So in the case of the Nazis, that's not a lie, that's withholding the truth. And you would in other situations as well. For example, the seal of the sacrament of confession is absolute. The priest cannot reveal anything that has been said in the confessional. It can't be violated for any reason whatsoever. Some professions require, keeping secrets. If you're in an intelligence agency, obviously, certain positions in the government, soldiers get their orders, or they're told to go to a certain place, or physicians have HIPAA laws, lawyers have confidentiality agreements, and then there's just human decency. Everybody should respect people's private lives. A lie becomes a mortal sin when it does harm to others. And that's sort of the difference between a capital L lie and a little white lie. The making up a reason why you were 30 seconds late for a meeting is one thing, but making a sworn false testimony before Congress is another thing entirely. However, even though some lies are more serious than others, all of them are lies, which, even the little white lies, which may only be venial sins, those can add up. We don't want to aim for venial sins. We want to aim for no sin at all. If you get used to lying about little things, eventually it gets easier and easier to lie about big things, because venial sins lead to mortal sins. That's why we shouldn't lie at all, because it's habit forming. And because of that, we should never think of lying as a potentially good or advantageous thing. It affects our ability to know the truth, which is a part of every decision that we make. The Catechism gets rather thorough on the topic of the Eighth Commandment, and it even has a section dedicated to the role of journalism, which I didn't think of immediately, but in fact, it is really important. It's sort of the fourth branch of the government. A critical and questioning and skeptical press. Unfortunately, even though the role of journalism is to provide the truth for the population, unfortunately, in our country, the national news companies are all owned by entertainment companies. And so they cater to, certain fan bases, from ultra right wing to ultra left wing. There is a news channel for everyone, and it makes it very difficult to determine what is actually happening and what is actually true. There are, in fact, apps that you can get that help you kind of sift through it and draw your own conclusions. There's the Ground News app, which takes all the headlines and compares them to one another and puts them on a scale from most conservative to most liberal. And my simple advice on any of the news is that just watch your local news and give up 24-hour news channels, because the 24-hour news channels, there's no reason that they should exist. Nobody needs the news 24 hours. And so they have to keep your attention, and so they do so by sensationalism. They want to keep you watching because they want the ad revenue that comes with it, that justifies their existence. And so they say crazier and crazier things to make sure that they don't lose their audience. The Catechism also addresses how civil authorities they have a responsibility to be stewards of the truth. Authorities should ensure that information we get is real, and so the Catechism speaks out against things like propaganda, falsifying the truth for political engineering and things like that. And then finally, and rather interestingly, I think, the Catechism addresses the topic of sacred art within the context of the eighth commandment. Truth is beautiful in itself, but truth can also go just beyond words. Even before he revealed himself to us in words, God first revealed himself to us through creation, which was the work of his words. Let there be light, and there was light. So from the very beginning, there is truth. Because we were created in the image of God, we too express the truth of creation through the beauty of artistic work. Art is a distinctly human form of expression, of creation. It's something beyond, the mere survival instinct that other animals have. And so by creating authentic art, human beings imitate God in his creation. It's one of the ways in which we reflect the image of God. And so sacred art is true and beautiful when it contributes to the faith and adoration. Art is at its greatest when it conveys the surpassing beauty of the truth of the human person. And the truth is invisible, but the love of Jesus Christ is visible, and that's what sacred art captures. It captures the beauty of God reflected in the Mother of God and the saints and the angels. Genuine art draws us to adoration, to prayer, and to God himself. And for that reason, the church has always, commissioned and promoted sacred art in all of its forms. So that's the eighth commandment. Let's finish with our examination of conscience. Have I lied? Have I gossiped? Have I spoken behind someone else's back? Am I sincere in my dealings with others? Am I critical, negative, or uncharitable in my thoughts of others? Do I keep secret what should be kept confidential?